In 2004, Ford released a stunning new car, the Ford GT. It was inspired by the Ford GT-40s of the 1960s, which Henry Ford II ordered developed to vanquish Ferrari and claim Ford's racing supremacy. The challenge turned into the most riveting and expensive battle ever fought on the world's racetracks. Public and the media response to a prototype of the Ford GT was overwhelmingly favorable. The company was besieged with questions about when its supercar would be built. Ford was about to celebrate its centennial, and it seemed fitting to have a legend from its glorious past help move the company into the future. Just 45 days after unveiling the car at the January International Auto Show in Detroit, Ford made an announcement.
Well, the answer is we are going to build it.
A team of engineers, lovingly referred to as the Petunias, was charged with getting a working prototype ready to be driven by company chairman William Ford at that summer's centennial celebration. While the Petunias struggled to meet the impossible deadline, they began to learn about the cars and Ford's racing legacy. Ford's racing roots predate the company. It began in 1901 when company founder Henry Ford built the Sweepstakes, an ash-framed, wheeled sled powered by a massive 8.8-liter two-cylinder engine. The car wasn't very fast, and its handling was scary. The steering had to be manually unwound after each turn because the technology for self-centering wheels hadn't been invented. Ford and the Sweepstakes won their first race in October 1901 when he beat the favored entrant at the World Championship held at the local Grosse Pointe, Michigan racetrack. His average speed during the 10-mile event was a little under 45 miles per hour. The victory generated headlines and helped Ford line up backers to launch his car company. His next racer, the mighty 999, brought Ford even more publicity.
On October 25th, 1902, Barney Oldfield set a world's record in the 999. He drove it a mile a minute, and this phrase ushered in a new era.
Ford's main desire was to build and sell cars. His low-cost, high-volume Model T made him rich beyond belief and turned his company into an international powerhouse. Ford continued to sponsor racing while he built his colossal automotive empire. At the urging of Preston Tucker, Ford's son Edsel spearheaded the company's efforts to finance the Indianapolis 500 racing effort of Harry Miller in the late 1920s. The mass-produced Ford V8, released in 1932, became the darling of hot rod enthusiasts. After World War II, Fords competed in NASCAR, a new kind of racing inspired by Prohibition-era moonshiners who drove fast to outrun government agents. All of this domestic activity was tamped down by a 1957 agreement between General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler to stop sponsored racing. But sales fell without the adrenaline rush of those Sunday race victories. Europe had no racing ban, and its very different form of motor racing, European GT competition, was thriving. The GT, or Grand Touring cars of the 50s and 60s, were the world's most advanced automobiles. These sophisticated machines were expensive, but they delivered exceptional performance. The attitude towards speed started to change at American car companies by the mid-1960s. General Motors' Pontiac division unleashed the GTO. High performance at Ford received a boost when Henry Ford II backed Lee Iacocca and Don Frye's desire to create the Mustang. Ford also tapped its British subsidiary for its racing expertise to compete at Indianapolis. This was not enough for Ford's executives. They were intrigued with European racing, especially Ferrari. The Ferrari 250 Le Mans, or LM, a Grand Touring class car, was dominating the famous 24-hour race. Its racing victories helped Enzo Ferrari sell his very expensive road cars to wealthy clients who loved the feeling that they were driving the cars of winners. Ford wanted that reputation for its cars and decided to buy Ferrari. A team went to Italy to broker a deal with the god of motorsports, Enzo Ferrari. They made a deal with Ferrari, agreeing to pay $16 million for the car company. But while they were finalizing the details, Ferrari declared, "I don't want to race at the Indianapolis 500. Ferrari didn't want his sophisticated cars consigned to racing around an oval track, but Indianapolis was important to Ford. Henry Ford II tried to fix the deal, but Ferrari held firm. Ford was insulted and outraged. Reportedly, he said, "All right, we will beat him." Beating Ferrari meant one thing: taking on the leading GT class winner at the ultimate testing ground, the 24-hour race at Le Mans. Ford quickly assembled a team led by Le Mans veteran John Wyer to develop a car with only one purpose: beating Ferrari while winning Le Mans. The car was derived from the English Lola GT. The team was told simply to get the job done. Henry Ford didn't care what it cost. It was all about winning and pride. The project car was named the GT-40, the GT for Grand Touring, and 40 because it stood 40 inches high. Its engine had been developed for Ford's Indianapolis cars. The 256 cubic inches delivered 350 horsepower. The engineers were confident that this would turn the GT-40 into a 200-mile-per-hour racer. By April of 1964, the GT-40s were ready to go public. Anticipation was high as the sleek, glass fiber-bodied cars took their first practice laps at Le Mans in preparation for the June race. This was the first encounter between Ford and Ferrari. The rain didn't dampen their spirits, but it did make driving difficult. One of Ford's drivers spun out of control, crashing at 160 miles an hour. Then the other GT-40 crashed. Not a propitious start for their efforts to unseat Ferrari at Le Mans. The next outing for the GT-40s was in May at Germany's Nürburgring, but once again, things went wrong. The rough surface of the track caused too much vibration, and resulting transmission trouble forced the car out of the race. It wasn't a total loss. Driving had uncovered handling problems that needed to be corrected. Spoilers were added front and rear, and the car was ready to go again. Finally, it was race day at Le Mans. On June 20th, 1964, 3 Ford GT-40s took their places on the track for the grueling 24-hour race. Ford fielded 3 cars with 2 drivers each. It hoped that one of its 3 American drivers, Phil Hill, Matson Gregory, or Richie Ginther, would bring home a victory. Things started out badly when Phil Hill's car refused to budge due to a vaporization problem. Ginther started to move out at over 200 miles an hour down the Mulsanne Straight and took the lead. Phil Hill had solved his car's troubles and set a lap record by averaging more than 131 miles an hour. Then came trouble. 2 GT-40s were sidelined with transmission trouble, and the third had a fractured fuel line. The race was over for Ford. Ferrari would win. The GT-40s continued to have trouble when they were raced a month later at Rheims and in Nassau. Henry Ford wasn't happy. He enlisted the help of an American to take over, a Texan, Carroll Shelby. As a driver, Shelby had won Le Mans in 1959, driving for Aston Martin, but heart trouble had forced him out of professional racing. This colorful and talented driver wasn't beaten. He decided to do what Enzo Ferrari had done. He built his own cars, the Cobra, and started an independent racing team.
And that's how it all started. Today, Shelby American is a pretty good-sized business. We're building Cobras for racing and for fun. And our coupes are getting ready for another season and another crack at those red Ferraris. We've got a couple of new entries.
Shelby's Cobras and Daytona Cobra Coupes were already making a name on racetracks, but he couldn't say no to Henry Ford. He agreed to take over the GT-40 campaign. He had 2 months to prepare 2 cars for the Daytona Continental 2,000-kilometer race. Having Ford's financial and engineering resources meant the only limit was his imagination. Shelby went to work transforming the GT-40s. Ford's aerospace division helped him correct airflow problems, and its parts bin supplied the more powerful 289 cubic inch engine that he used in the Cobra. He was ready for the Daytona 2,000-kilometer race. He took the 2 GT-40s and 2 of his Cobra Coupes to the race. Ferrari was there, and the world watched to see if the good old boy from Texas could unseat the sophisticated Italian team. By the time 1,243 miles had been run, the question was answered. The GT-40s came in first and third. Shelby's Cobra Coupe claimed second. A good beginning for the new team. The next match was at Sebring. Once again, Shelby fielded his Cobras and the 2 GT-40s. One of the drivers hung on the tail of the leading Ferrari and bided his time. Another challenger, the Corvette Chaparral, was a strong contender. The other GT-40 developed suspension trouble and was out of the race. It was now up to the remaining car. A heavy rainstorm added to the tension. It turned into a grueling race. The rear end broke in the leading Ferrari and the car retired. This cleared the way for the GT-40 to come in second behind the Chaparral. Shelby and his team were ready to take on the world. Ford decided to compete in the Targa Florio race in Sicily before Le Mans. This would pit the GT-40s against Ferrari in his own country. The Targa Florio, a twisty road race through the hills of Sicily, would challenge the cars and the drivers. While the setting was stunning, it was a difficult course. It was clear that Ferraris were built to eat up the curves. Their drivers knew the roads and were hometown heroes. Bob Bondurant and John Whitmore, piloting the GT-40s, made the best show possible. Whitmore lost a wheel, and a spectator grabbed the lug nut. Whitmore was finally able to put his wheel on and return to the race, but he couldn't catch the Ferraris. Bondurant had even worse problems. His car skidded off the road and out of the race, a disaster for Ford and another victory for Ferrari. But Shelby had a surprise for Ferrari, the Mark II GT-40. He put a bigger engine in the GT-40s, as he'd done to his Cobras. The Mark IIs were modified to accommodate a Ford 427 cubic inch engine pumping out 460 horsepower. Two arrived at Le Mans, but they hadn't really been tested. They didn't finish. Ford vowed to return in 1966. Ford sent 8 Mark IIs and 5 smaller engine GT-40s. To help prepare this assault, another American team, Holman Moody Struck from North Carolina, built 3, and 2 were readied by Alan Mann Racing from England. Ferrari fielded 7 cars against the GT-40s and had 3 more racing in a smaller class. All eyes were on the Ford and Ferrari teams. This was war. As day turned to night, the Shelby car, driven by Ken Miles, was running well. Another driver, Chris Amon, had brake problems. The long race took its toll. By the time morning's first light shone on the race, only 5 GT-40s remained in the running. Soon, one more was sidelined with a broken suspension. Ford did not want to lose to Ferrari again. A Ferrari crashed. Fortunately, the driver was fine, but the car's race was over. Within an hour, the last Ferrari in the GT-40s class was sidelined with a bad transmission. There was no one in the way. It looked as though Henry Ford would get the victory he wanted. The GT-40s sailed to a first, second, and third place finish. They'd beaten Ferrari and established a new average speed record of 126 miles per hour. But it wasn't the all-American photo finish that Henry dreamed about. One of the winners was prepared in England and was classified as a British car. While the finish wasn't quite right, the GT-40s were crowned the world champion prototypes in 1966. This wasn't good enough for Ford. He would settle for nothing less than an American car with American drivers winning at Le Mans. He returned in 1967, determined to get the finish he'd paid for. Ford came back with veteran team members Mario Andretti and Dennis Hume, as well as 2 new American drivers, A.J. Foyt and Dan Gurney. There was some concern about whether an Indianapolis 500 driver like Foyt could handle a European road race. The team was given an improved car, the Mark IV GT-40. The chassis was made entirely of an expanded aluminum honeycomb material sandwiched between thin aluminum sheets. The chassis was covered with reinforced glass fiber body panels. It was structurally sound, yet light. Extensive wind tunnel and road tests were conducted to improve its aerodynamic body. The engine was given 20 more horsepower, and 4 of the new Mark IVs were ready for Ford's attempt at an all-American Le Mans victory. 3 Mark IIb GT-40s were there to back up the new cars. Shortly after the race began, 2 of the older version GT-40s took the lead. They wouldn't hold it for long. The Foyt-Gurney team was out front and kept the lead. After 9 hard-fought hours of driving, Ford was holding on to the first 3 places. The Ferraris didn't have the speed of the Mark IVs. Hume set a lap record of 148 miles per hour. It looked as though the race was over. Unfortunately, Andretti crashed and 2 of the other Fords plowed into his car. Ford's fortunes started to slip. The next morning, Ford was still first, but Ferrari had grabbed hold of 2nd, 3rd and 4th, with another Ford in 5th. The 5th-place Ford lost an engine cover and was sidelined for repairs. Then a Ferrari dropped out. The other Ferraris pursued the leading Ford. Gurney and the rookie Foyt were safely 5 laps in the lead. They sailed to victory, followed by 2 Ferraris and another GT-40 in 4th. Henry Ford got his All-American victory at a cost that some estimate at close to $1 billion. As quickly as the GT-40 program had begun, it was over. Henry Ford had won and then lost interest. There was nothing more to prove. Ford of England continued to develop the cars, and independent drivers raced the GT40s for several years. However, the cars faded into history. It was a topic that intrigued many racing buffs and auto history fans. They dreamed about Ford someday building another GT40. Holman Moody and others built a few replicas, and some of the original race cars would show up at vintage events to delight the crowds. The epic struggle became legendary. It was a legend that 3 Ford vice presidents couldn't ignore. Flying home one night on the corporate jet, the conversation veered into a discussion about what the GT40 would be like today. Jay Mays, the head of design, started to doodle on a napkin. And before they landed, the 3 had conspired to launch a new GT. But it had to be ready for the upcoming centennial. It was a challenge for the designers and engineers to create a new supercar that paid homage to the past but would be relevant today. In just a little over a year, the GT emerged. It was 18 inches longer and 4 inches taller, but its lines were clearly inspired by the classic GT40s.
In an era of art school concept cars with wheels at the corners, the GT hammers home its point with an impossibly long front overhang, voluptuous shapes, and the romantic ideal of handcrafted cars with national paint schemes.
The team delivered their technological wonder in time for Chairman Bill Ford to drive it at the kickoff celebration of Ford's first 100 years. The new GTs are a reminder of the glorious racing cars of the 1960s, driven by legends like Jackie Stewart, seen here at the press launch with comedian Jay Leno. These glamorous cars took the world by storm and created a legend that lives today.
Oh, very exciting. What a bigger thrill than that. Jackie Stewart take you around in your dream car. Yeah, oh yeah, that's very exciting. Very cool.
Those cool cars from the 1960s dominated Ferrari on the world's most famous racing circuit. In 2004, the Ford GT returned, once again to challenge Ferrari, but this time on the streets of America. The all-new Ford GT came to life as a way to honor an American supercar that changed performance car history.